So since the 1960s, there's been a very strategic, concerted effort to infiltrate Western academic institutions with ideologies that it's not limited to, certainly not limited to anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism is one little nugget of these ideologies that have infiltrated, but it was really very much an intentional effort, and they were very successful. And now we see what it looks like when a generation or two of Americans, especially the Americans that are coming out of universities, so then going into the NGO world, going into international diplomacy, going into government, going into law, and going into academia, right? The professors who are today's professors were being indoctrinated by this 20 and 30 years ago. Now we know what it looks like. So we weren't paying close attention, and I don't think it's only Jews and only those concerned with Israel. I think it's many concerned with liberal values and human rights and democracy and freedom, liberty, and all the good things that I think we really want to hold on to.
Welcome to The Contrarian. I'm David Bernstein. In a world filled with noise, I'm here to provide the signal.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Contrarian podcast. I'm your host, David Bernstein. We continue in this series that we've been having on the new anti-Zionism, as I've been calling it. I might have actually successfully coined this awkward phrase because I heard Adam Lewis Klein use it or I saw him on social media. So I feel like I might have been successful in naming the phenomena, but we shall see. Anyway, it's great to be here with my co-host, Phil Siegel, and our special guest, Rona Kaufman. Just so you understand, those of you who are watching this on YouTube, it is Friday. It is Dress Down Friday. So I am abiding by Dress Down Friday. Unfortunately, my hosts are much better dressed than I am, but now you know why. Anyway, that's pretty much every day, even when it's not Friday. I'm doing this podcast. Seriously, I'm delighted that we have this. That we have you, Rona. Rona is the co-founder of the Center for Jewish Legal Studies, and a law professor, and someone who's really been at the forefront of this new anti-Zionism movement. And I'm really glad to have this conversation with you, Rona, and I know Phil is as well.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be having the conversation too. Wish we didn't need to, but happy to be talking about it.
Yes, exactly. So let's start at the highest conceptual level. Why are we facing this problem right now?
Because we weren't paying attention to the problem while it was growing for over half a century. So since the 1960s, there's been a very strategic, concerted effort to infiltrate Western academic institutions with ideologies that it's not limited to, certainly not limited to anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism is one little nugget of these ideologies that have infiltrated, but it was really very much an intentional effort, and they were very successful. And now we see what it looks like when a generation or two of Americans, especially the Americans that are coming out of universities, so then going into the NGO world, going into international diplomacy, going into government, going into law, and going into academia, right? The professors who are today's professors were being indoctrinated by this 20 and 30 years ago. Now we know what it looks like. So we weren't paying close attention, and I don't think it's only Jews and only those concerned with Israel. I think it's many concerned with liberal values and human rights and democracy and freedom, liberty, and all the good things that I think we really want to hold on to.
Yeah, well, I could not agree more. And the question then I always have is, well, like, how did they do it? And the reason why I think it's really important that we spend more time is I feel like we, in the Jewish world at least, don't always spend enough time diagnosing how a small country, let's say in the Middle East, like with 300,000 Qataris, was able to, and it's not just Qatar, of course, these are homegrown ideologies as well, but again, they've been a major factor. How were they able to penetrate our system? What were the tools that they used so that we might use those tools more effectively than obviously we have? Because it's just very strange that they've been this effective. How did they do it, in your view?
Yeah. So my co-founder of the Center for Jewish Legal Studies, Andrea Martin, and I, we have looked to understand better. I think, first of all, one of the reasons why we usually don't look back and try and figure this out is because we're in an emergency survival situation. And so we're just trying to deal with the problem at the moment. But when we pause and we're able to consider what happened, first of all, it certainly was not just Qatar. This is coming from Iran. This is coming from Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And it's coming from the 1960s is when it shifted to an intentional effort to infiltrate Western academia. Before that, it's not like this ideology didn't exist. This ideology has existed in the Middle East for a long time, but there really was an intentional effort. And in the very least, when it comes to Palestinian studies between the early 1960s and 1980, you see an explosion of Palestinian studies as a field of study in academic institutions across the United States and the entire Western world. And it starts with 40 scholars who start publishing articles in journals, essays, and then it just grows from there. They have 300 articles in a very short time in the first 5 years, and it continues to grow. And what we weren't paying attention to is two different things. One is the creation of a Palestinian narrative in academic circles, which alone wouldn't be problematic. Certainly not if it was a historic, truthful narrative. But in fact, that Palestinian narrative is an erasure and a, co-opting of Jewish history and Jewish peoplehood. And I wasn't paying attention. First of all, I was still in college at the time. I mean, when this first started, I wasn't even born. But when this really first hit academia, the first area of study, as I understand it, that really got taken over was Middle Eastern studies. And so the Association for the Study of Middle East and North Africa, ASMIA, another organization that my friend Asaf Romorowski runs, that organization broke off from Middle Eastern studies because Jewish perspectives were no longer welcome. And you're talking about, that's 30 years ago. So they had already broken off and recognized this a very long time ago. And then slowly over time, it moves through academia. I think what was unanticipated, both by enemies of freedom and certainly by Americans and by Jews, was the way that internet was going to increase the power of people who want to spread disinformation, as Naya Leck talked about so carefully on your podcast. Those who want to intentionally spread false information, how easy that was going to become. And that's probably the X factor in this whole thing, is how it went from something that was kind of a slow movement limited only to those who were in academia, not to understate their power, because again, they're the ones who are going into international diplomacy and government and journalism and all the seats of power across the world. But still, it wasn't a mass movement. And now, in the aftermath of October 7th, thanks to TikTok and Instagram and other social media outlets, it became a mass movement overnight.
Yeah, so you're a law professor. You're on a university campus. You've been in campuses. Do you see this on your own campus in your own field?
I do not see it on my campus. I see it in my field. So I'm at a small private Catholic university. And so I've really been insulated from what's going on. Now, University of Pittsburgh is 1 mile away. So it absolutely was on University of Pittsburgh's campus. And I have colleagues there. I'm involved with Chabad on campus and Hillel and with the student groups there. And I live in Squirrel Hill, a mile past the University of Pittsburgh. So it's been present in my life, even though thankfully it was not on my university campus, which is not a campus where we have ever seen mass protests. And years ago, when there was some protest, it was not political. It was about something that had happened on campus, but there were really disruptive protests. And the university's then president immediately shut it down, saying, listen, the mission of our university is to educate our students, and we're not going to allow for protests that are going to be disruptive and destroy the mission of the university. University. So he took a really strong stand at the time. And I think that's part of why we haven't had a problem. In my field of study, it's been really devastating for me. My area of study before October 7th was pretty exclusively feminist legal studies. That's where we came up with the name Jewish legal studies from, but it was feminist legal studies. And so among feminist legal theorists, the anti-Israel, anti-Western, anti-white sentiments were incredibly strong. And that was, I mean, I can talk forever about how devastating that was and how clear it was that all the people I thought I was allied with in my field of study were not really my allies after all.
Yeah, there's a new book coming out on this by Kara Jasela. It's called Feminist Anti-Semitism and Intellectual History. She's a great scholar. She wrote a great piece for Quillette magazine on the subject, and I think it's coming out in just a few weeks. So I'm looking forward to reading that. But yeah, I mean, all these fields have been infected by it, and so whenever I hear somebody deliver a critique of these ideologies entering academia and K through 12 education, which is our specialty, or, broader society, I always suspect that they've been mugged by reality somehow, and it's usually very close to home, and that sounds like you too. So you're now part of this new sort of, not new, maybe new old intellectual combat that is emerging with some of the scholars that we've had on. How did you get drawn into the I'll say it again, the new anti-Zionism?
I'm very proudly Zionist. My grandparents were all Holocaust survivors. My parents are Israeli. I was raised in the United States in an immigrant community of Israelis and also the descendants of Holocaust survivors. Hebrew was my first language. I spent many summers in Israel. My sister married an Israeli and moved to Israel, and I took my kids to Israel over the summers. So Israel's like incredibly relevant to my personal life and identity. I really started noticing the problem, I'll tell you, in 2014. So I had spent that summer in Israel with my children, and there was a war with Hamas in 2014. And when I returned home, the war was still going on, and I got in my car to go to work the first day after my summer break, and my radio in my car was always set to NPR radio because that's what I would listen to when I would drive into work. And I was listening to coverage of a situation that I had just come home from, and it was false. It was false. And I really, that was my first moment of complete confusion. And then I, of course, started wondering, well, if I'm being lied to, if this is the thing I know so much about, and now I'm recognizing I'm being lied to, what else am I being lied to about? Which is, there's these moments of cognitive dissonance that we remember in our lives.
Right.
So that was the beginning for me. I did not shift my research. I started to write about it a little bit, and I thought about writing an article here and there. And then after October 7th, I should say a little bit before October 7th, I decided that I was going to address the issue of you cannot be feminist and Zionist at the same time. There were two conferences coming up. There was the American Association of Law Schools annual conference, and the Women in Legal Education was putting on a session on taboo topics. And I had been chair of that section in 2019. This is 2,000 women law professors from across the country who come together in this section. And since that time, the listserv for that section had become increasingly hostile to Israel. And post October 7th, it really exploded with, the lead sentence before any discussion was the Zionist colonial apartheid genocidal regime, blah, blah, blah. So as I was already recognizing that there was this pushback on the idea of being a Zionist and a feminist, I had prepared to present at that conference and also at a law and anti-Semitism conference that was coming up. And then October 7th happened, and then everything got much worse. I actually foolishly thought I wouldn't need to write that paper anymore because I thought that the October 7th attack demonstrated to anyone who was paying attention and watching why feminism and Zionism are so deeply tied together. But I was wrong because the claim,
the intersectionality ran in the other direction, did it not? Yeah.
Inexplicably. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe inexplicably, but explicably in the sense that when your worldview is tied to success and failure, in other words, you believe that the oppressor is anybody who's succeeded or any group that's succeeded, and the oppressed are anybody's group that fall below the mean in whatever metric you want, then that's going to be us. I mean, on the wrong side of the ledger, and so we're not going to achieve intersectionality cred in this ideological matrix, and we're stuck with that. And so we better start pushing for something different than that, which I think we all agree is classical liberal values. I don't think we ever strayed, but at least reinvigorate that discourse. Last question, I'll turn to Phil. So what's the role of a legal scholar in all this?
It's really critical. I mean, maybe it's a little narcissistic, but I think legal studies is the most important area when it comes to, implementing everything and anything. So here's an example of what we're seeing right now, right? Right now, we're seeing different manifestations of age-old Jew hatred. Call it anti-Semitism, call it anti-Zionism, call it anti-Judaism. We're actually seeing all three at the same time. And if we talk about it in academia, we can see how it's showing up on college campuses. So sometimes it's, Charlie Kirk was killed by Mossad. I'm not even sure which category that falls into. You have like global conspiracy and anti-Israel. And but you also have like resurgence of kind of the old-fashioned anti-Judaism. And then, of course, you have an insane amount of anti-Zionism. And the law, in responding to that, right, would say, okay, we have Jewish students that are being discriminated against. And now at a very threshold level, the law is silent, meaning we understand anti-discrimination law puts people in different categories, and it says these are categories that are protected. So the way American anti-discrimination law works is generally people are protected on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, age, disability. Now we've included in sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, but they're very specific categories. There's no category, of course, that says Jew, just like there's no category that says Black. It says race. The problem for Jews is that we don't neatly fit into a category. Generally and historically in the US, most of the anti-Jewish discrimination that has been litigated as religious discrimination. Some of it has been litigated as race discrimination, because when some of the early anti-discrimination statutes were adopted after the Civil War, and they include race, they're intended for race protections. At the time, Jews and Arabs were thought of as races. So Jews and Arabs are like grandfathered in and can still bring suit under race. And now we have guidance from the Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Education, that of course Jews, Muslims, Arabs, Sikhs also fall under national origin, which is also tied to ethnicity. So you have Jews, not only Jews, but you have Jews who don't really fit into a category. And part of the problem is that we've never theorized ourselves in legal scholarship. And so that's why the courts don't know what to do with this. They're very confused.
What do you mean we've never theorized ourselves? And does that mean that we've never placed ourselves as a potential victim of any of civil rights law? I mean,
we have not. Right. That's exactly what that means. So, for example, when you have statutes that prohibit discrimination, usually the group that is being discriminated against is theorizing what discrimination against them looks like. For example, calling a person boy, that's generally not viewed as a discriminatory thing. But if a Black man in the workplace is called boy, that's code for other things. That's code for discriminatory language. And so Black scholars and critical race scholars have theorized that in the legal scholarship so that courts understand. When it comes to sexual harassment, when when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, harassment wasn't discriminatory. It was only discriminatory to not hire a woman or to fire her or to demote her. And meanwhile, throughout the 60s and 70s and early 80s, the main form of discrimination that women were facing was that they were being sexually harassed or they were being asked for sexual favors, which is also a form of sexual harassment. So it was either hostile environment or this quid pro quo sexual harassment. But it wasn't until my heroes like Catherine McKinnon theorized that eventually it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you know what? Sexual harassment is also sex discrimination. So Jews have never done that. We never theorize. So we all, when there were cases that were brought by Jews because they were being fired for, not being able to work on the Sabbath, for example, there wasn't much work that needed to be done because in that particular case, we fell neatly into the frameworks already existing about religious discrimination. But when you have Jews being called Zionists or Zionazis in this coded way, and we haven't done the work to theorize it the way that the critical race theorists theorize what it means to call a black man boy or what it means to hang a noose over someone's desk, right? They theorize this stuff, or what it means to discriminate against black hair. We haven't theorized any of that. And that's why the courts are really struggling. And it requires really sophisticated judges with a really deep understanding of discrimination against Jews to get these cases right. So that's just one thing.
Yeah, but so let's
go ahead, Phil. Yeah.
Yeah. What I was going to do, I want to kind of push on an example here, Rona, the one that kind of everybody falls back on now, which is the MIT case. Talk about where we missed the boat there. If we had had some of this scholarship where maybe describe the case for everybody, describe why it was adjudicated the way it was, and how it might have been different under better scholarship from our end.
Yes. Okay. So in the MIT case, the First Circuit, so this is the only federal court of appeals that has heard this issue, they dismissed the student's claim and essentially said that anti-Zionism is not a form of actionable discrimination against Jews because it is protected political speech. There were other holdings in that case as well, and other issues and other errors that we are appealing. But that's kind of the gist of what references back to what I'm talking about, which is that the court said, okay, I see all of this speech on campus, and this is people on campus objecting to a war going on in the Middle East. So how could that possibly be anti-Jewish? We do have scholarship. It's not that we had no scholarship. I mean, Ken Marcus and Mark Goldfeder, who are also out there litigating the cases, they have published on the connection between Zionism and Judaism to make it clear that those two are inextricable. And I think they've done that very successfully. But that wasn't enough to translate for this court. And also, this court didn't want to find in favor of the students. And also, this judge is also the same judge that denied the death penalty to the Boston Marathon bombers because terrorism isn't that bad. So, there's other issues happening at the same time. But we have that in the legal scholarship, but we don't have any scholarship really that explains what the anti-Zionist movement is and how committed it is to the annihilation of certainly all the Jews in Israel and the Middle East, and also eventually in the rest of the world once the caliphate is established. Like, we don't have that established at all in the legal scholarship.
So let's kind of, you've opened the door, and I'll open it all the way for you here. So what is the Center for Jewish Legal Studies going to do to help solve this problem?
So we have 4 pillars. We're starting with the first 2, which are strategic scholarship and collaborative networks, and they're really very closely tied together. So strategic scholarship is organizing the scholars who are writing in this field. Post October 7th, there's no question, many of my Jewish colleagues really felt that this was an existential crisis and that it was incumbent upon them to contribute however they could. Because we'd never had a field of studies that was Jewish legal studies, they are all experts in different areas of law. They could be corporate law experts, Title VI, Title VII, First Amendment, national security, whatever it is, feminist legal theory, whatever it is. And everyone after October 7th woke up and said, okay, what can I do to help my people? And so they took the area that they know best and they wrote something. And that something that they wrote is meaningful and impactful, and it definitely makes them feel better. but it's not building a field of scholarship or study. I think this would happen organically. If we had 50 years and if we weren't in a hurry, this would just happen on its own. What we're going to do is we are going to take what would take 50 years and we're going to get it done in 5 years. And the way that we're doing that is by gathering the scholars who are committed to do the work in this field. We need to sit in rooms together. We need to have the conversations about how we understand this field of study and how we understand ourselves and what the intersections of law and Jewish peoplehood are that need to be explored. And we're going to start writing. And so we're going to have fellows. We are collecting our fellows now. We have a law and anti-Semitism conference at Cardozo Law School coming up next week, March 8th and 9th. And so that'll be a convening of scholars. And we are going to basically commit to doing this as a collective effort. I think I may have mentioned this to you once before, but, most things are depressing after October 7th for me. It's been a hard couple years. But the thing that's super exciting is that I have spent a lot of time romanticizing and dreaming about what it would have been like as a feminist legal theorist to have been in the room in the 1960s and 1970s with Catherine McKinnon and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Gloria Steinem and the women who were creating a field of legal study and these social justice movements. And here we are now, we're in the room, right? So like those of us who are engaged in this, we are creating this. And we're going to do that. So we're going to publish articles. We're going to hold conferences. We're going to have retreats and workshops and symposia. And then we are going, obviously, education will flow from there very easily because once you have scholarship, you have courses to teach. And then our fourth pillar is Israel engagement.
And just taking it one step further, while it's fun to create a new academic field and so forth, the purpose isn't to create the academic field, right? It's to level the playing field that we have and practically help us not have more MIT type of decisions. Is that a fair?
It's even beyond that, right? So MIT is the emergency of the moment. We are actually trying to do this from a forward-thinking approach. So if we look at Canada and the UK and France, we can see the problems that are on the horizon, right? So JNF lost its tax-exempt status in Canada. They're fighting that. That's 1 minute away from us. Also, this new theory of anti-Palestinian racism and the idea that if you even state your Zionism, that you could then be found to be engaging in anti-Palestinian racism. And this is like really honestly, like quintessentially, this is the whole deal. The idea that the view that Jewish people have a right to live peacefully in their land without trampling on other people's rights. The view that Jewish people have the right to live freely in their land. The suggestion that that is a supremacist movement or that it is a racist movement against others is such a distortion and inversion of truth. And so we're looking ahead too. So yes, we need to do the work we need to do to solve the problem on the ground. I want to also mention real quick, Cooper Union, that decision came out this week. It's only a district court decision, but it is, you asked, what would it look like if the First Circuit got it right? And Cooper Union's case, that decision is what it looks like when they get it right. And it's true to the law. It's true to the First Amendment. It's true to civil rights. And it's also true to the possibility that anti-Zionism discriminates against Jews on college campuses.
So one more question. So that we interviewed Andrew Pessin as well, and he's starting an institute for the critical study of anti-Zionism. Talk about how you all might collaborate, what's really different between the two things, but what's kind of the synergy that might be between the two organizations.
Great. We are broader and narrower than the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism, and they are broader and narrower than us. So we are broader. Actually, I'll start with how we're narrower. We're narrower because we're legal studies. and we're laser focused on legal studies, which is actually very broad in and of itself. We are broader because we're not limited to anti-Zionism, right? We are looking at all intersections of Jewish peoplehood and law, which is not just anti-Zionism, and for a forward-thinking approach, not as a emergency movement, which we need the emergency movements too, but a forward-thinking approach. What I imagine is in the future, let's say we get past this whole anti-Zionism thing and we succeed and all is well, and that is a thing of the past, and everyone now recognizes, oh, anti-Zionism was a viciously anti-Jewish movement. It was genocidal and insane, and we've all rejected it. Then aliens appear on Earth. If the aliens are perceived to be our friends, then the Jews will become the human enemies. And if the aliens are perceived to be our enemies, then the Jews will suddenly be, right? Because Jew hatred morphs and changes over time. And at the moment, it is a hatred of Jews based on our nation, but I don't know what it's going to be next time. So we're broader in that we are not at all limited to anti-Zionism. Andrew Pessin's organization, which I love and which I'm really looking forward to all sorts of opportunities for partnership and collaboration. It's broader because it's not just legal studies. So there's room certainly for legal scholars to do anti-Zionist work as part of a collaborative effort with interdisciplinary scholars, which is really valuable. So like basically the vertical in our broad research agenda that is laser focused on anti-Zionism and law, those legal scholars will have an entire interdisciplinary community through the Institute for the Study of Critical Anti-Zionism. So it's broad because it's interdisciplinary, and it's narrow because it's focused on anti-Zionism.
Very good. I think that's very interesting, and it's heartening to see elements of our own community pivoting and doing something different, to recognize that the ideological landscape has shifted. It's not what it was. It may have been brewing for a long time, but okay, we now understand that we have to deal with anti-Zionism as a distinct phenomenon. We cannot continue to think of it or put it as merely just the latest expression of anti-Semitism. It has its own dynamics, its own politics, its own legal structure. And by the way, I think APR, which I will take some credit for being one of the first people to talk about it in the U.S. We saw it in Canada, and our organization put out a backgrounder on it and some op-eds really highlighting that. And I think we said, well, the latest form of anti-Zionism coming to a theater near you. And that's exactly what and funny thing is, when we were talking about this really foul form of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, APR, which no longer means annual percentage rate, we asked ourselves, how long do you give it to the U.S., come to the U.S.? And my colleague, Brandy Shafatinsky, said a month. And I think I said maybe 3.5 weeks. And I think we saw the first signs of it 2 weeks later. So yes, it is here. It is infecting places like California. And it even says that denying the Palestinian narrative, the Nakba, is a form of anti-Palestinian narrative, racism. So we've got to be attuned to these ideological shifts and these rhetorical techniques that they bring, and we've got to fight this sort of intellectual assault with our own intellectual firepower. And I'm really thrilled that you and others are in it to win it. So really appreciate your work, your voice, and I know we're going to be seeing some great things.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you for all the work you're doing, because that's the bigger battle.
Right. I always say that, when we're talking about, I was when I first heard about this new movement, I was like, come on, guys. This is really about this larger ideological assault, right? It's really about the assault on liberal values. It's really about the oppressor narrative. But then I realized that it's good. Like, we need to think of it in different frames, right? So yes, in one frame, it is the larger post-colonial, settler colonialist movement that we're seeing in the oppressor-oppressed. But I think it's also really important to see it as anti-Zionism, its own distinct phenomena, because it has its own dynamics that sort of both run parallel and separate from that larger intellectual movement. It has become the most intense expression of it aimed at a specific people. So I think I'm really glad that you and others have done the breaking the ground on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have to parry the tip of the spear before you can parry the whole spear, right?
Yeah, or do the same both at the same time. I'm not sure. So we'll argue that later.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Rona.
Thank you, Rona.
Take care.
Thanks, Rona.
All right, so Phil, we just had this lovely conversation with Rona Kaufman. Very impressive, as our other guests have been, but she's, I think, brings a unique set of skills to the table. What did you think?
So yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation with Rona. It was maybe a little bit different than some of the others, which I think David is quite good as we get these different viewpoints and opinions. She brings a very personal set of personal experiences to bear. She also has the experience of having seen this in other areas outside of Jewish studies with her feminist studies work. And also hearing her describe what the center that she's starting and how it's going to practically help as we fight anti-Zionism, but other forms of Jew hate in the courts, I think is also a very different point of view maybe than we've heard from the first three guests.
Right. She kept on talking about how we haven't theorized Jews in the law. In other words, what anti-Semitism can look like in the same way we have other communities, protected classes, and it's actually somewhat controversial. A former colleague of mine, who's a good guy, a smart guy, but is a bit of a quote unquote contrarian on these issues. Ken Stern has argued that anti-Zionism should not be understood as a form of prejudice because Zionism is a political ideology and it cannot be classified as a sort of form of Jewish identity, even if a lot of Jews are Zionists, because being Jewish is different than being a Zionist, and Zionism actually has a point of view. This is his argument. If we ever want to bring on a contrarian to the Contrarian podcast, he might not be a bad person because he's going to challenge at least Rona's conception here. He'll be concerned about the tenor of anti-Zionism in the country, and I think he would say, yeah, that's all very bad, but I think he would not be in favor of treating it as a protected class in the law.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he clearly would then have a bone to pick with Adam, because I think the whole point that Adam has really brought out into the forefront is that that's not true, that that's a ruse, that it is, while it may have been true, or that, there are certainly some people that behave in that way, that it's being used that way as an excuse to be kind of a backdoor anti-Semite rather than somebody who just doesn't like the political view of the state of Israel, or the fact that there is a state of Israel, and that's a very different thing. I don't think that that's going to be any more a viewpoint that's going to gain a lot of traction with at least people like us.
No, I think that's right. I don't think it has a lot of traction, and this is also where the IRA definition and its role in, and one of the reasons why there was such an emphasis and has been such an emphasis on the IRA definition is it treats anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism. So therefore, when a professor, for example, at a university says, I canceled the program on Zionism in my class, that becomes admissible evidence if there's a broader case against that professor of anti-Semitic discrimination. So in other words, saying I'm not going to allow Zionism might not do the trick, but you can look at it as intent as part of a larger lawsuit and creating a hostile environment. I think that's what the IRA definition potentially brings, and so I don't know. Isn't that theorizing? I would have asked for this if we wanted to spend another 10 minutes. Isn't that theorizing the role of the Jew in the law? I mean, isn't that what IRA was all about? Maybe we'll have a follow up with her, but that was sort of what was remaining on my mind.
And of the four people we've talked to, they've all had different angles on that very question. Right.
That's right.
With Adam, it's anti-Zionism is a unique hate movement. It doesn't really matter whether it's the same as anti-Semitism. With Naya, it's distinct. It's just a new form of Jew hate. With Andrew, he thinks it is, but he thinks we've lost that argument. And Rona says it doesn't matter unless we have some scholarship that connects it, so that we can, so that we can either convince people that matter that we have to convince, or make sure that behaviors get changed. So, I mean, we've had very different views. It'll be interesting to see what our next guests' viewpoints emerge when we have that discussion.
Right. And the other thing about it is, like, we have to ask ourselves, like, how effective are each of these things going to be? And the answer is, I don't know. But are these legal tools a game changer? I mean, she puts a lot of stock in the legal tools that we have at our disposal and this emerging legal scholarship around it. My view is that these lawsuits are important, but that what we're dealing with is also a larger cultural phenomenon. We have to be willing to fight in the war of ideas more broadly, which I think Andrew and the others are doing. They're fighting an ideas war, but also that we have to be willing to fight in the political circles where this is emerging. And, as you know, my big thing is that we've lost power upstream from where we've usually been active in school boards and in NGOs and in city governments and human rights committees or commissions at the city council and the like. Those are the places where a group of activists have sort of seized control, and they're using that to define the discourse much further downstream. And we're now finally experiencing that, and we have to win there too. I mean, I don't know how much our legal tools are going to be helpful in that, but it just shows, that there's more than one tool in our toolbox here.
Yeah, but the last thing I'll say, though, on the legal tools is the warning that she gave, which I think is very important, is right now it may seem like the legal tool, we're fighting very specific things, like especially on campuses, because that's where our resources are pointed.
Yeah.
But she says, watch out, because the things like excluding Jews from being able to buy real estate, which we thought went away, 30, 40 years ago, we don't know whether people are going to be able to say, well, I don't want to sell my home to a Zionist.
I think that's right. And if you don't win on campus, you might not win in the larger, world, right? If that becomes legitimized. I mean, we're seeing the horseshoe, especially I think in the last couple of weeks, more than I've ever seen, like Anna Kasparian, who is,
oh my gosh.
I mean, she's horrible. Just absolutely horrible, and somehow that's legitimized on the left. And there was a talk being given in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and they started erupting. And this has got to be a leftist audience. And
Ezra Klein.
No, I don't think it was Ezra Klein. I might be wrong about that. Where they started, it started with a chant around the rich, and it ended up around.
Oh yes, that one. Yes,
around the Zionists.
Yeah, Jews.
It was Jews actually.
Tax the Jews.
Tax the Jews. Lurie. Exactly. Yeah. And you just can't imagine this. What you're starting to see is that the anti-Zionists, who always said we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist, now feel like they have permission to just go all in on Jew hatred, and we're starting to see that there's the shift, and it's been depressing. And one other thing, I know we're going longer than we usually would with this sort of debrief, but it's been on my mind a lot. I'm trying, like, when you ask yourself, like, why does everything feel like it's sort of falling apart for the American Jewish community? And I started to say, like, sometimes I worry that when we treat this all as anti-Semitism in this sort of super category, we may be missing what's actually happening in the convergence of forces that make us feel this way or experience things this way. And I think we have to do that, because otherwise we're not going to fight it effectively. Like, what's happening at the very same time as the university phenomena and the K through 12 phenomena, which we're well acquainted with, is also that the Democratic Party is now come under the influence of these progressives and in ways that we haven't seen. Normalizing this in a way that we haven't seen, and it's shocking to us. And when you hear formerly pro-Israel candidates or members of Congress now not taking money from AIPAC, there's a sort of a loss a fundamental loss of power and influence that and then of course we're seeing what's happening on the extreme right and how those forces have become legitimized. Now these are all distinct but related phenomenon, right? Like but we have to deal with them as related, but we also have to understand that they're distinct, and so that we understand where our interventions belong. And I think maybe we should spend some time thinking about that in days ahead about how these things are coming together. Yes, we need legal strategy, and we need a local advocacy politics strategy. We need to regain power in these and influence in these places, and we need to rethink our relationship with the parties. How are we going to? How are Jews going to be effective or comfortable in either or both political parties? These are real questions, and we have to think of them separately in an integrated way.
Yeah, and the reason we know it's getting worse is because the edge cases. Because there was an incident with Ezra Klein, who I don't think has actually said whether he's Zionist or anti-Zionist. He's kind of more ambiguous, but he was shouted down by a crowd for his Jewishness. And then even Peter Beinart, who all of us would consider kind of the example anti-Zionist, was filleted by his supposed kind of pro-Palestinian groups when he chose to even go have a conversation in Israel.
Yeah, Tel Aviv University. And exactly. He then went through the most disgraceful struggle session on X, apologizing for showing up. I mean, I've known the guy for like probably 30 years and or more even. And I mean, I haven't talked to him in quite a while, but to see him go through that shows you, if nothing else, it shows you how bad the discourse has gotten, that a Jewish anti-Zionist is no longer welcome in their ideological tent.
Not enough. Yeah.
Not enough. All right. Well, It's been real. Right. Thanks a million. Have a good day, have a good week and a good weekend. And we'll be back to solve the problems of civilization in the Jewish world.
If we're still here.
If we're still here.
All right. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Take care.